In light of the recent developments in the media, and ongoing conversation that has seemed to crop up time and time again is the qualifications that individuals hold and whether or not they are able to hold the offices or the positions that they hold based on those qualifications. And I think the conversation goes a little deeper than just a set of qualifications. It speaks to a lot more than that. And joining me for that conversation now is the Chief Executive Officer at the Institute of Directors in South Africa. That is Professor Parmi Natesan. Prof. Natesan, good evening. Nice to speak to you again. The last time you and I spoke, we looked at the ensuring the competency of those appointed candidates within SOEs in particular. But now I want to look at the competencies in general. I mean, it's more than just looking at directors' degrees or the qualifications that they hold. It's about due diligence and about good governance.
Absolutely. Good evening, and thank you for having me. Yeah, certainly. I mean, this due diligence prior to appointment of a director and a non-executive director, especially because they are not vetted as employees of the entity. It's critical that certain areas are vetted. So as you would for your employees do certain checks like qualification checks, criminal checks, ID checks, credit checks, and all these other things. It only makes sense to do it for your board members as well, considering the big role and responsibility that they play within the organization. But even outside of those standard checks that are done or should be done, I think it goes much deeper for directors. The role of directorship is a complex one. You're making decisions that impact an organization and ultimately the stakeholders of that organization. And therefore, it goes without saying that you need to have the necessary knowledge, skills, and experience in order to serve as a director. Understanding governance, understanding your role as a director is so important. And apart from knowledge, skills, and experience, of course, comes with it the whole ethical stance and your whole moral compass, right? So you're looking for individuals who will do the right thing no matter what for the entity and not necessarily for themselves. So those are some of the critical things that need to be considered.
Prof, how important is it from an entity point of view as well? I mean, we touched on the directors and the responsibilities that directors ultimately bear, but the directors also bear different levels of responsibility dependent on the entity. So, I mean, a public entity, for example, there needs to be a greater level of accountability and scrutiny than a private entity because you're dealing with publicly invested funds as well. So, surely it's not just about the actual individuals that are being appointed, but also in the context of where they will sit in the ecosystem that is our economy.
Yeah. Look, I think what you're saying makes absolute sense. There's nothing in our legislation at the moment that sort of distinguishes between the two and requires further in-depth vetting on one versus another. But having said that, it only makes sense that if an organization has a large public interest, either because it's funded by public money or it's a non-profit there to deliver service to the public, etc., or even your listed companies where shareholding is widely held, it only makes sense that the interrogation and vetting of candidates needs to be quite deep. And I know certain industries like the financial services industry, the regulator actually does very intense due diligences before accepting directors who are put forward for the banks and insurance companies, for example.
Prof, should we be looking at that as a blueprint of sorts to say that we need to have certain checks and balances in place? Yes, step number one, but we also need to do a certain level of due diligence, a certain depth that is required because of one, again, as you said, the positions that these individuals will hold, regardless of the institution. Now, should we not improve the systems? And if so, how do we improve that? How do we improve the level of due diligence that's done and ensure that good governance continues?
Yeah, I think there is improvement needed, and it's not like the recommendations aren't there, because King 4 already talks about it, where it says candidates' backgrounds should be independently investigated and their qualifications should be independently verified. It's very clear and explicit. In the most recent case in the media around questions around a director's qualifications, unfortunately, what was reported this morning by another news outlet was that a number of organizations on whose board the specific director served say that they never vetted her qualifications as they thought it was either not necessary or not a requirement. And I think that's surprising because it's clear in King 4 that it should be done. And how can one determine that it's not necessary to check or vet candidates before appointing them to a board? It's a critical position.
Especially in the context of the public interest that lies with certain positions, but obviously within the King 4 governance and other policies that are in place, these are policies that need to not only be implemented but also educated on, right? I think a part of this sits in understanding the role and the responsibility that you take on as a director, and the reason why policies and structures and statutes like King 4 are in place is to ensure, of course, that you have a detailed understanding of what you're getting into as a director, but also from a company perspective, what they're bringing on in terms of services.
Absolutely. Many organizations and individuals see governance as just another, burdensome compliance exercise, and perhaps don't buy into the substance of it and the purpose of it. And if you think about the reputational damage that an organization can suffer, if it's found that one of their directors, misled or faked a qualification, it's just not worth it to end up needing to answer those sorts of questions and face the public and face the media. I mean, the more common sense thing to do is just adjust processes and make sure that these things are checked prior to appointment.
Hopefully those conditions are met and the requirements, of course, are kept in check. Obviously, the governance and the importance of this cannot be stressed enough, and we hope that all those individuals that occupy these positions are properly vetted by the institutions that are looking to employ them. Thanks so much, Prof. That was Professor Parmi Natesan, who is the Chief Executive at the Institute of Directors in South Africa, on the importance of good governance within institutions and the importance of ensuring that individuals go through the proper checks and verifications before being appointed.